So welcome back. We look forward tonight to begin a brand new chapter, Perek Tes. We concluded last class. The Perek Tes was a lengthier shir. We tried to get to the end, a bit longer than the norm, as you could have noted. Now, the Perek Tes, I would add that it's interesting how the Perek Tes begins. Aval Lagabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, the way it is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which says really it's really a clear continuation, for whatever reason the Alter Rebbe had to divide these chapters, because it's really Aval in contrast to whatever I told you in Perek Ches. So generally, we spoke about this quite a few times, that the Alter Rebbe's Prakim, the Gimel, the 53 chapters of Likutei Amorim, which we merited to conclude as well. We mentioned it in the past, that we merited to conclude the entire Likutei Amorim. For that matter, it's on this very website, which is always easy to access. And in Shaykh Emunah Bichlal, in all of the Alter Rebbe's works, the Alter Rebbe had extremely famously known, actually it's even documented, the Seder Mesudar. In everything the Alter Rebbe did, the order was something which was outstanding by the Alter Rebbe. His sense of organization. And in his Torah, you see it emphatically. If it's in Nigla, it's in Pnimis HaTorah. The Shulchan Aruch is something stands out very much, additional to the Sheni Hazav, the way of expression, the choice of words, which that itself, for that matter, is also tells us about many halachas, because Alter Rebbe added that, deducted this, extremely organized in everything he did. The Alter Rebbe did in particularly in his works, in his Torah. We see the Nigla Torah, I say primarily the Shulchan Aruch, which is a separate subject. Because the Shulchan Aruch, it's very unique the way the Alter Rebbe wrote the Shulchan Aruch. I say the Sheni Hazav, besides the fact is the easy way of following and the precision of choice of words and what he added, what he deducted, what he added in the brackets. I mean, there's a whole, so much written of the way the Alter Rebbe wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Obviously, it's not part of this present learning, understandably, but I'm just trying to point out that the Alter Rebbe, everything with the Alter Rebbe was extremely organized. And we have Likutei Amorim, for example, the 53 chapters. There's such a clear sequence of every single chapter, how it follows the previous, and what does this chapter have to tell us as it's built on the preceding chapter and its introduction to the following. It is the sequence of the Alter Rebbe's writing, particularly in the Torah Shebiksav, would be Likutei Amorim, Tanya in general, is something which is exceptional, and it becomes very obvious. The more one learns Tanya, you see, wow, this was a precise choice of the Alter Rebbe, and also what period comes before, what ideas the Alter Rebbe felt should come before, and what ideas should come later. But when you learn the Tanya and you see the bigger picture, you see that you can even appreciate that particular sequence of writing. But when and so too Shaykh Emunah, you notice, we spoke about this a few times, that every Perek is built on the previous one. Even these Perakim, these chapters, Perek, the Hey Vav, it begins a new idea in Perek Daled, answering that famous question in Perek Gimel. Again, not to go into it now, understandably. And then he continues with Hey Vav. Zayin brings the message home. That's why Zayin is such an elaborate Perek, because once he brings that message home, of the Yichudi Ilah, Yichudi Tata, that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we mentioned quite a few times, always worth to repeat. Shari Emunah, this is one of the most exceptional gifts which fell on mankind, primarily on Yisrael. In all of history, the Alter Rebbe took, the not only the information, but he took all that energy which is there behind the curtain, which there in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Hashem Echad, is obvious. Nothing has to be meditated upon on high or ponder upon on. To the contrary, and that level, as a famous expression, Eilamis is beischachas. The novelty is Eilamis from the perspective of Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's truly one. Everything is truly one. And the Alter Rebbe dragged that information from behind the curtain and presented it to us, which most of us are this side of the curtain. And he brought us into a gate of Yichud Ve'emunah, true oneness and true faith, as we mentioned quite a few times, not only to increase our declaration, just to give it a little more oomph, our declaration, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Emrim Pamayim B'chol Yom. We mentioned again in our daily recitations, we do it even more than once a day, twice a day for that matter, a few times, and so on. But it's a matter of demonstrating to us really what oneness is all about, what Hashem Echad is all about, and it becomes real for those who learn Shaykh B'Emunah. And you learn it again with the Seder which Alter Rebbe presented to us, Dover, Diber, Aleifnov, one Perek after the other, just understanding what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say. You don't come out of the gate the same way you went in, inevitably. We mentioned this quite a few times. We're literally, the Alter Rebbe pulls us in to the area of Achdus Hashem, even Achdus Hashem himself. In Perek Zayin, he points out the two levels of unity and oneness. Especially the Alter Rebbe presents the idea that anybody who could learn this could tap into Yichudi Lo, the supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Alter Rebbe is Chabad, meaning to say he's not just telling us stuff which is on high, which most of us know that there exists all this on high. At least we know that it exists, but the Alter Rebbe fed it to us that cognitively we can appreciate it, and just like everything else, when you understand it cognitively, on a cognitive level, it has an impact on your emotions and your whole thought process, your thought, your speech, and action. I mean, this is something which definitely, again, when one learns Shaykh B'Emunah, one comes out totally transformed, metamorphosed, literally, from even in a simple. Obviously, there's so many different levels of one's appreciating the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof, so that his oneness is also Ein Sof, but nonetheless, that entry into that, you come out, one comes into the gate, and like we had said the other day, you don't have to come out, you can stay there, but the idea that you glean a certain information which is totally transformative. And one of the things also is like Dr. Rebbe's Seder in Zion, for example, he brings home this chapter, so he feels very comfortable elaborating and dissecting different matters which were controversial even among daily Israel. The famous idea of Tzimtzum Kipshutei, it's in Zion, because once he brings home this message of Hashem Echad, he elaborates on this, and he's able to straighten out different ideas which needed to be ironed out. This one was a classic in Perek Zayin. It's a long Perek also in the space amount of pages it is. For that matter, I think it's the longest amount of classes. We gave a one chapter. And then he goes into Perek. So again, the sequence of chapters. Ches and Tes would be the same. Tes following Ches. And again, we could easily appreciate it. But Tes following Ches is even more. That's what we're getting at over here. It begins, Avol Gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the truth of the matter is, it would seem to be, it should be one Perek, because he's saying things the way it is by the human being, and as opposed to in contrast to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Avol, it begins, Avol Gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what Alter Rebbe decided, again, to divide it. Perhaps maybe the message how it is by the human being should be internalized and then understand, and now we're going into a different area of the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't know exactly the reason why the Alter Rebbe did it, but again, he decided to do this in this way. Again, you could glean a little bit of that energy. You want to say, Avol Gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not even in the same chapter. Interesting. I'm just thinking aloud over here. And maybe that's the reason that Alter Rebbe is contrasting the way things are by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not to be applied by HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way we apply matters on ourselves as human beings. Even in this area, again, even in lofty expressions of our soul, lofty soul expressions. I don't mean nefesh elikis, the godly soul, simply lofty expressions of the human being, which the human being is the me'ula of the entire creation. Every human being, for that matter, the kaich of speech, thinking, intellectualizing, and so on, not to apply any of our rules, so maybe that's another reason, perhaps. I fear to suggest anything in the holy work of the Alter Rebbe. We're lucky that we're able to learn it and appreciate the gift, but shy away from anything, believing that we have you can say, I mean, it would be humble, it would be silly for me to even say that I could understand why the Alter Rebbe did so, but just as a flash which comes to mind that maybe this is why the Alter Rebbe divided it. Avol Gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, say, yeah, this is a total different chapter. Don't try to connect the two chapters together. It'd be interesting. But what we do mention time and again, that it's not fair to take real time from the present class to spend on bringing in the information of the previous class, because it's truly a click away. Wherever you're watching the class, it comes up with a text, but they always have the link of the original website, which there's an advantage because they have the way it's set up. First of all, there's a separate scroll bar for the text. It's easy to follow the class, and namely, it has all the previous classes of Shaykh B'Emunah and for that matter, Likutei Amorim, as we mentioned, we merited to conclude. And even these very chapters, Ches, it's important to take the time of Ches to repeat everything. We had 3 or 4, I think 3 classes, if I'm not mistaken, explaining what Dr. Rebbe is saying in Pirkei Ches. Look there, like I mentioned in the past, you don't even have the rewind, the 45 seconds or minute and 20 seconds, which one needed to do kind of in the past. We could even say the past for those who remember what the cassette looks like, or the tape recorder. You have to rewind here. Even that minute we don't have to spend. It's literally a click away, and it comes up in the same site. You could see the previous class, the information of the previous class, and understand why the Alter Rebbe is going. The website is Tanya Online, one word, tanyaonline.com. And again, that's the original site where you can have such easy access, and it comes up also in the same fashion, in the same manner. So I'd like to begin Perek Tes, but I never make it. I never, as much as I believe strongly that every moment of the present class has to be with the present information, but I didn't get there yet. I'm working on it because I don't know. I feel, despite that it's so obvious, this what I'm saying, especially again, newcomers. We mentioned this again articulately most of the classes, because it's talking no reason. But again, maybe I'll get to it one day. I'll be able to really open the class with exactly what we're holding. So, having said that, I'll try to do it with maximum brevity here. Alter Rebbe starts the chapter in this idea which he mentioned in Perek Ches, that is the previous chapter. This is what he mentioned quite a few times of the way things. Basically, he quotes the Rambam quite a few times, for that matter, in Likutei Amorim, and this becomes a predicate of the Alter Rebbe's presentation of Shayich Memuna. In Shayich Memuna, in this segment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Musav Atzmusav V'Daita Kalechad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his das, his knowledge, and this is what he knows, it's all one. And again, we're going to really try to do this briefly, because we spoke about this really in length and in expansion in these 3 or 4 chapters in Perek Ches. By a human being, there could be an idea of achdus, oneness, but nonetheless, in this area, for example, in this example, by a human being, it's a composite of 3 things coming together, of 3 things. It's a combination of 3 things coming together: one's self, one's muhus, in other words, who he is. He's gifted with knowledge, it's a second entity, and then with that knowledge, he's able to know a lot of important information. Nonetheless, and we can always identify, these are 3 things coming together. I am going to take my mind and study that subject, and I'll know it. And if you want me to share it with you, I'll share it with you. But I can't just throw it out, because it's something that I have to invest in. That means that's really not part of who I am. But sometimes there could be certain information that it looks like it's part and parcel of who you are. 2 plus 2 is 4. Someone doesn't have to take you to any time. Usually, one would wake up somebody in the middle of the night, in the middle of a deep sleep, and he would respond 2 plus 2 is 4, which seems to be that's part of the hard drive of the human being. But no, there was a time you didn't know it. And for that matter, 2 plus 2 is 4 was there before you even came about as a human being. It was always there from the beginning of creation. And you tapped into it, maybe at a very young age. Then maybe because you know it from then, and it is so simple, because it truly is simple. That's why it really looks like it's part and parcel of who you are, but it's not. There was a certain time in your life that you have to take your mind, 2 plus 2, the teacher wrote on the board, then it clicked, which showed you that it wasn't who you were. You needed to bring it together. As opposed to by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says it's achdus pshuta, it's true oneness, not a oneness of combination, and it's not a oneness based on a composite of different ideas coming together. Okay, so again, we're just still trying to do this in brief over here. And the Alter Rebbe is machadish over here. This is the Rambam. He says the truth of the matter is everything about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That everything is about one. You say the oneness of Hashem. Chanun, he's graceful, he's kind and merciful. It's not like he, the Ein Sof, would take the cap of chesed, kindness, let's say compassion, put on that cap and then express the compassion, the kindness. It's not so. There's no things coming together. Again, the Rambam himself has the proof, which we spoke about a few times, and Alter Rebbe elucidates on this clear proof that you can't say about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's achdus murkeves, because what was that before? 2 plus 2 is 4 it's an independent type of information. independent information. When Hashem says Hashem knows what's going on in this room, what is this room before Hashem looks into? With his dynamic eye, what going on, he's God, he knows everything, there's nothing to hide. But what is it? It's the answer, and there's nothing independent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it is part of the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not he's looking from there and into here and so on. Again, I shouldn't even say there's tidbits of this idea, because this is the basis of the Rambam's proof, and Al Rebbe makes it so clear, and therefore Hashem knows everything because he knows himself, because it's all achdus pshuto, not more keves, not a composite type of oneness. And he says it refers to all Hashem's midas. So I see, he says, Al Rebbe continues, says, could a human being wrap his mind around this? It doesn't make sense for so many reasons for that matter. First of all, we can't appreciate it on our own, because we know that by us it's always a combination of different factors coming together. When we execute a particular practice, if it's kindness, even severity, discipline, grace, compassion, it's always but a few things coming together for the human being to implement that. And why would it work different by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's hard to wrap our minds around this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all one. He is the Rachum. He is the Chanun. This is him. Interesting, we pointed out that Al Rebbe chose again, it has to be with maximum precision. What midah did Al Rebbe spend 2.5 lines on? Beautiful, so encouraging. The Al Rebbe speaks about a bunch of midas, and he points out like 2.5 or 3 lines. And it's an important piece of information. In the end of the day, he says, this is what Hashem is. And so it's hard to understand, hard to wrap our minds around it. And for a number of reasons, again, he is also the question. So what is he? If he's a Chanun, how could he be a Rachum? Even though they're a little bit closer in their character. But let's say Chesed and Gvura. So if he's Gavron, how could he be Chazdon? If the Ein Sof is Ein Sof and he invests in Chesed, we can understand. Now he's investing in Chesed, now he's investing in Gvura. But we say this is who he is because there's no two entities when it comes to Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's Achdus Pshuta. So what is he? Again, that's another question. We can't understand it. And other ways and other reasons why it's difficult for the human being to understand. As Al Rebbe says, let's step back, he says. First thing is, don't try to understand the Kodesh Baruch Hu because you're part of creation. Hashem is creator. But then Al Rebbe takes a full page over here. And this is what he's contrasting the Pedic test, the Avol. A full page and says, hey, let's look at what you, the way you as a human being function. What is your highest level is Chochmah. Again, we spoke about this. Let's not go into it right now. Your lowest level is Asiyah. And the Alter Rebbe says, like, these are 5 levels. Chochmah, which is really Chochmah Bina Das, 1, because it's the cognitive faculties. Then you have the Midas. And then you have Machshava. Then you have Dibur and Ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. These are 5 levels. And again, you got to go to previous class to see where the Alter Rebbe was going with this. In other words, how he shows you. This is the beginning of the function and the energy. When you think about it, it's also part of the nerve system, which is the brain and so on. But even the way the person functions, the evolvement, the development of the human being, it starts at Reishis Chochmah, right? Reishis Chochmah, the part Reishis Chochmah means Hashem. There's a simple meaning, but there's the idea. Reishis Chochmah, everything begins with Chochmah. The end is Asiyah. So when we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we say, okay, there's a notch or 2 over, I could still try to figure it out. And if I can't, it's something like, why shouldn't I be able to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way I see, the way I function, or apply the rules, the ways by the ways by me, the ways by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? But you say, no, it's a bit deeper. His workings are a bit higher, exalted, deeper. So that itself would say, don't try it. If you don't see, you can't appreciate the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way you appreciate matters, the way it expresses about yourself. Okay, most of the times I won't ask a question because Hashem is a few notches higher. But sometimes I'd like to believe that, okay, it's comparable. One way or another, he's greater, higher, a few notches. The Alter Rebbe says it's not so. And here's the Aval Gav HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only it's not so, first of all, he says, by the human being, each one of the 5 is not just like one little notch over. Alter Rebbe writes, each one of the 5 is ke'ayin. The end of the soul energy, which is a ma'aseh, is ke'ayin, is almost like nothing insignificant in comparison to the dibur, to the soul energy, which is in speech. And we can appreciate that, not only because Alter Rebbe writes ke'ayin. Action could be attributed to an animal also. For that matter, sometimes they could do certain actions that a human being, even they can do better than a human being. Pull, push, and so on. Schlepp a wagon, whatever. They don't have the refined touch of the action of the human being. They can't draw a picture, but generally, Maisa is not necessarily, this is what stands out by the human being. Speech is something which is the more we think even into it, the gift of speech. It says, in other words, the speech is really the unique gift God, or unique establishment Hashem established, which is called the human being. Created a human being, has the ability to give and speak and even eloquently and share thoughts and so on. The chayis, which is a maisis, ke'ayin, is like insignificant, legabe, in comparison to speech. And so too speech to thought. And we could also appreciate that in machshava to midas, where there's not even isis again. Check it up. We elaborated on this in the previous class, that is, rather. And then from midas to Chabad, it's also, this is ke'ayin. He says, compares it, uses the euphemism of gufla neshama, the difference of body to soul. So you can't just even say this just five levels. 5 levels, 1 to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it's 5. It's higher. It's deeper. It's a bigger number, but you can't say it's ke'ayin. That's what the other says. Yes, this is ke'ayin. It's like saying 500,000 and 5 million, 5 billion, 5 trillion. Yeah, 5 levels. Not a big difference. No, there's a big difference. Someone understands this quantity difference between 5 and 5 trillion knows that it's not just like 5 steps higher. There's a quantum leap between each step, and how much more so between the first and the fifth. Comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the highest by a human being is the lowest by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that says a lot. Because, and he brings the pasuk, famous pasuk, Kulam b'chokhmah sisa. So obviously there's the simple meaning, Kulam b'chokhmah sisa, you create everything with wisdom. But Kulam Chokhmah Sisa also has the connotation that you're the Chokhmah, which is the highest by you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's Maisa, is the lowest, Asiyah. And then the Alter Rebbe would say that obviously, and even that obviously it's not limited to 5. The difference is beyond 5, beyond 500, beyond 5,000. He says, Ribur Voves. Ribur Voves says it's not only many tens of thousands. Ribui, it's not Ribui, Reish Beis Vav Yud. It's Reish Beis Vav Aleph. It's tens of thousands levels higher. Now we're still trying to figure out, to see that we're gonna try to apply our rules, or the rules the way it makes the rules that make us function, or the rules that are applicable to the human being, to try to apply it in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We mentioned last week that Rebbe mentioned quite a few times in his responses, in his talks, that the question, the novelty is when you can understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can make sense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's conduct, not the other way around. Because it's a revavis madregas. So the question really is, why is Alter Rebbe, if he tells us already 5, why does he have to tell us about tens of thousands? Or rather, if he tells us there's tens of thousands, which makes sense, because he's the creator. And then he adds not only tens of thousands, which is also a number, he says Adin Ketz. Again, we can appreciate that, because Hashem is Ein Sof. So it's infinitely greater, infinitely higher, infinitely more profound, deep, Hashem's workings. So why would he start with a 5? Because he wants to tell us, it's easier to say, okay, Ravav is Hashem, and the difference is astronomical and so on. But he wants to say that even that's what you can appreciate. Understand that even by yourself and your workings, these 5 levels are very far, each one from the other, from the preceding level, and one from the next. And imagine, and when you focus on all 5, the Asiya in comparison to the brain, the cognitive faculties of the human being, it's truly, you could even say Bein Arech in context. Everything in this world is really not Bein Arech, but you can say there's no Erech. So the Alter Rebbe starts with this and says, yeah, by you the highest is Chokhmah and the lowest is Asiyah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kol Chokhmah Sisa. His lowest point is Chokhmah. So your starting point is Hashem's lowest point. So there's nothing even to hold on to say, well, maybe a little bit 5 over. These 5 are so distant one from each other. So we should never even try to entertain, okay, I'm going to try to make sense, or we're going to try to apply the rules ways by me on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no erech. And even in these 5 different steps, these 5 levels, and we say by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the highest by us is the lowest by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, means to say the starting point is so vastly distant. And here the Alter Rebbe says, on top of that, there's Riburi Vavis. It's not even 5. It's tens of myriads of thousands, tens of thousands, myriads of Revavis, or tens of thousands times tens of thousands. Do the math. And he adds Adin Ketz. So there's no question to begin with. I can't wrap my mind around the fact that Hubedaite, Dover Yadua, in other words, that it's all one Achdus Pshuta, because I can't fathom this idea, because even I find Achdus within the world of Das, I know it's a composite of 3 things coming together. Even things to be, again, part of my hard drive, which is Echod now, but it's an Achdus Amor Keves, not an Achdus Pshuta. But I can't understand Achdus Pshuta. The way it is applied by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, especially you say every midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu like that, I can't understand. So you can't understand. But I want to understand. I just apply things the way I apply myself. Yeah, he's Hashem, but something. Let me hold on to something. Can't hold on to anything. Because you're talking about something be'ein areich, truly be'ein areich. Even when you're focusing on these 5 levels, how much more so you're talking about the Revavis Madreges, and then you're talking about Adin Ketz. There's no starting point. And this is what Alter Rebbe says, Aval Gabi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's see as much as we can do the text. Aval Gabi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, in comparison, we're going to start again, Perik Tes, and page Vav in the original text, or wherever you're following this on the corresponding English text. However, the level of Chachma which by a human being is the beginning, the initiation, the commencement of the process. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu Seif Maisa, it's considered Maisa, the lowest by us, which is Maisa. That's the level of Chachma by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Hainish Nechshev is it's considered Kilu B'chinas Madrigas Asiyah L'gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That this level of Chachma L'gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the level of Asiyah. Meaning the pasuk like it says Kulam Chachma Sisa, that you created everything with Chachma. So that's a simple meaning of the pasuk. And Alter Rebbe gives another pirush. It's not Chas v'Shalom negating the pirush. There's obviously Kulam, you created everything with Chachma. Understandably, that's a simple meaning, with wisdom. Hashem, you create everything with wisdom, by design and so on. But the Alter Rebbe teaches in this context, Kol Chachma, he says the Chachma is by you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Asiyah. V'hainu leimar, which is the lowest level. V'hainu leimar, sheker chayis shebasiko v'nis v'gashim v'zgab chayis ha'chachma, she'reishis ha'makar chayis ba'adam. That if you look at the lowest, which is Asiyah in comparison to the Chachma, which again, there's a gap of 5 levels in each one in comparison to the other one, is Ke'ayin, like he says. And he says, like a Guf l'neshama, and you do all 5 of them. He says, the way it is by man, v'chalabrim gashrim, also in all other physical creation. And we explained this in the end of last week. Who's Alter Rebbe referring to when he talks about physical creation? But again, you can see it in the very end of last week's class. So, who this Asiyah. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to start showing you again. He elaborated on this in Perich Ches, but he's going to, in saying the way it is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way of the starting point by HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, in other words, our starting point is his finishing point, is the lowest of ways by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Alter Rebbe is going to show you that even by the Asiyah, in other words, that wide gap between one and the next, and how much more so the wide gap of all these 5 levels, and combine the Asiyah in comparison to the Chachma. Shahu, this Asiyah is Ka'an L'gabe Chayis Shevei the end of the soul energy in action is insignificant, which means it's almost like nothing in the face of the energy. In other words, in comparison to the energy which exists in letters of speech. And again, we can all appreciate that. Action in comparison to speech, soul energy in action in comparison to soul energy in speech. No comparison at all. Ki'ayin. And the speech itself is Ki'ayin L'gabe Chayis Shevei Machshava. The second, again, Milmata L'mayla, from below higher and yet higher, from Maisa to Dibur, and again in comparison to Machshava. It's also Ke'ayin in comparison to the life, soul energy which exists in the letters of Machshava, like we explained last week. Shahu, that the Machshava is Ke'ayin L'gabe Chayis Amaylas Hamidis, Shemehanim Shcha Machshava Zu, which the energy of the Machshava, the soul energy of the Machshava, is also Ke'ayin, almost as nothing, is insignificant in comparison to the energy and the state and the virtuous state of the midas, of the attributes, emotions, from where this machshava would come from it stem from. The machshavas ke'ayin, we spoke last week also. In Midas, there's no oisius. Again, we did take the time to explain in try to get to that. The human mind, not only again just the title that Alter Rebbe is telling us over here, but just the way that we took the time last week to point this out, that we can be able to appreciate it on our own. This vast difference between every level to the high, in comparison to the higher level, which the Alter Rebbe justifiably uses the word ke'ayin and gives this metaphor like a guf l'neshama. That's a great distance. That's a great difference. And these two are very distinct. Neshama is neshama. The guf, it could be a very live guf, in other words, because it's penetrated with the energy of the neshama. And a healthy guf, particularly a healthy guf, you see as a lebedik guf, but could you compare it to the soul energy? And again, we're not talking about the nefesh halikis as we spoke about last week. We're talking about the neshama, the koich of the neshama is bein arich to the guf. And so to each level in comparison to its preceding level. So this and this midah, the energy of the midah, is ke'ayin, almost like nothing in comparison to the energy and the level and the virtuous state of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, malkid midas, which is the source of the midas. Midas come from chacham bin hadas. We explained this last week as well. It's nothing to do with Tanya and nefesh halikis. This is the way it is by the human being. Intellect, understanding something thoroughly, it arouses a drive to it. If it's something to fear from, it arouses a drive to fear and have awe of it. If it's awe, fear, reverence, it's all what you understand, you perceive in your mind. So the midas stem from chokhmah. So the energy of the midah is ke'ayin in comparison to the energy and the virtuous state and level of the chacham bin hadas, the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, basically the cognitive faculties, which are mikayah midas, which is the source of the midas. Is kain mamish erech madrig zumalas hachachma shireishus umakar chayis shebchol ha'ilum zlagavi hakadosh baruch hu hoidu v'atzmei. These fiery 5 levels. Chachma would be the lowest. Kulum chachma sisa. These 5 levels are from chachma till HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have these 5 levels, which each one is distant from the next. And because each one is distant from the next, you combine all 5, the distance is very, extremely vast. So when you think about Chokhmah, you think about Hashem, and then you want to start making sense, Chokhmah, appreciation, and say, well, that's supposed to make sense with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is 5 levels higher than Chokhmah, than wisdom. And that's not just like one notch higher. Okay, let me just try to find that within the Chokhmah, let me find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, sense, common sense, rational, should demonstrate this HaKadosh Baruch Hu just a little higher than Chokhmah. It's not just a little higher. It's 5 levels higher. Just like you cannot say, in action, try to find wisdom in pushing a table. There is no wisdom in pushing. Well, obviously there's planning to push a table and you want to do it for a reason. People do things for a reason. But the action itself, there's no wisdom. There's no brain, the famous expression, no brainer. Simple. You don't attribute one to the other because they're far apart, 5 levels apart. Want to find chokhmah, understanding rational, and the Ein Sof, which is 5 levels, and each one again from the other is so distant times 5. So this becomes the premise of this, what Alter Rebbe is saying. In the beginning, the first part of Perek Ches, it doesn't make sense to you. Why should you think it should make sense to you, based on everything what I'm sharing with you at this time? So we'll stop over here, but Alter Rebbe is going to go on like we mentioned before, that it doesn't stop by 5 levels, not by 5,000, not by 10,000. Ribuy revavis madreges remimis, and Alter Rebbe adds adin ketz, because we're talking about Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's how much Hashem is removed and exalted and withdrawn, if you will, from Chokhmah, which is the beginning, the Reishis, the way it is in our system. So obviously, it carries even this ladder. It's a new wave of information, even more with the Alter Rebbe presented in today's class, what we're learning now, that we learned up till now. And additionally, I would add that this sends so much perspective on this, which we mentioned quite a few times. And the best way is to express this concept of the way We just mentioned it, quoting from our Rebbe, that when you do understand, when you can make sense, or you find the workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in alignment with your workings, if at least you believe it so, that's the novelty. Because how did that happen? But Hashem is a Kol Yochel. And we do ask Hashem, things should be l'teiv lanu kol hayamim, that things should make sense. And Hashem promised in His Torah, things are going to work out and so on. So, but conceptually, that itself is a bracha, that when there's that symmetry between the human being and even the Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll look forward to continuing this important chapter. Be'ezus Hashem, have a wonderful night.